burnout is really unique. Because what bothers you may not bother me. What causes stress to the person on my left may not cause stress for the person on my right.
Hi, everybody. My name is Richard. Welcome to A Better Lifestyle. Today, we're going to talk about burnout. And I was doing a quick research on the internet, and I found out that 84% of millennials have experienced burnout in 2021. So I'd like to hear what my guest has to say about that. So her name is Dr.Hollie Sturgeon, and I think it's going to be a pretty interesting episode. So I'm looking forward to it. So, Hollie, tell everybody who you are, a brief resume of who you are, let's say in 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and then we'll jump in right into the topic.
Okay. First, I am a clinical pharmacist, slightly different than a community pharmacist in that I work in a hospital setting and I work with doctors. So I round on the different patients and help make sure that their medications are optimized for whatever is going on with them within a hospital setting. So slightly different, but still working with patients and helping them figure out what's going on with them. It's kind of interesting because as long as I've been a pharmacist, I've also been helping people work with their burnout symptoms. Usually they come to me and say, hey, can I get something for sleep? And then that conversation happens like you do with your pharmacist always. They say, well, what's going on with you? And so it's been a little over a decade that I've been working with people, helping manage their burnout, either prevent it or in quite a few cases recover from it. And that was really helpful for me when I went through my own burnout because I already had all those strategies in place from helping them. And in 2020, when all of us hospital workers were pretty much living at the hospital instead of bringing COVID home, we were all able to kind of benefit from that as well.
Okay. So I was saying the stats before, and I saw that on the internet. What do you have to say about that? Are these stats good, or are they accurate?
If anything, I'd say they're a little low. The millennial generation has been almost culturally set up to have burnout because they were trained from little children that the world is supposed to be fair, which is just not the way it is, unfortunately, and that they were supposed to find a job that required a college education. They needed to go get a college education. And once they got that college education, that they were meant to go out and find a job that they loved. It wasn't just enough to find a job, but you needed to love it. You needed to be passionate about it. And so we have an entire generation of people who have gone out and gotten higher education, and not everybody gets to have their dream job. And so there's a whole lot of underwhelm and frustration, and a lot of people that are way overqualified for the job that they're doing because they got the education they needed to get the dream job they wanted. And between all of that friction and frustration, that's where the burnout's coming from.
Wow. So, what are the major signs of a burnout?
There's actually three key dimensions to burnout. And it comes from, let's talk about stress versus versus burnout first. Regular stress is basically anything that causes your body to release stress hormone, cortisol, so fight or flight. So say you see a spider or you're watching television and something really exciting happens, your body dumps cortisol. Well, when you're talking burnout, that's the difference between, say, briefly revving your engine to swerve out of danger or to maybe get on the freeway versus putting your car up on blocks and running your engine at high rev for months at a time. And that's basically the equivalent of burnout. You're running your body at high rev for months and months. And even when you run out of fuel, when you're just exhausted, you're still getting that wear and tear on your body. Now, because of that, when you look at the three key dimensions of burnout, you're looking at number one, overwhelming exhaustion. Your body's run out of fuel. It's just wiped out. And it's not just lack of sleep, it's a bone weary exhaustion that could be physical or mental or emotional. And particularly when you're talking about millennials, that fact that they are so underwhelmed and disappointed, it's a spiritual exhaustion for them. The third or second key dimension is a sense of ineffectiveness or a lack of accomplishment at work. Basically, you're running around in circles. You're not going anywhere. And once again, we're looking at the millennial situation where they're overqualified for their jobs. So yeah, they feel like they're not going anywhere legitimately. And the third key dimension that makes up burnout is feelings of cynicism and detachment from your job. So the human brain is hardwired to look for a why. It wants to have meaning in what it's doing. And if you're chasing your tail, if you're not doing anything that's meaningful to you, there's not a whole lot for your brain to grab onto. So it disengages. It kind of takes a step back. But at the same time, when it's disengaging, it's really deeply focusing on the things that are creating friction in your burnout causing environment. So maybe you've got a work environment where your overhead lighting makes a weird sound and your brain just won't let it go. Or you've got a micromanaging boss, or there's constant interruptions while you're trying to get your things done. And of course, all that friction brings heat and then flame and boom, burnout.
Wow. What's the difference between a nervous breakdown and a burnout? Are they the same? No, or they're
well, nervous breakdown could really be anything going on in your life. Where burnout, the World Health Organization has called that a workplace specific phenomenon. It's a workplace problem that requires workplace solutions. Now, that having been said, I think it depends on what you consider your workplace, because maybe you're not a 9-to-5 worker, or maybe you are a 9-to-5 worker, but you go home and you take care of your kids, and you can't tell me that taking care of kids isn't a job. So where do you draw the line between workplace and not workplace? It's not necessarily outside of the home and inside the home.
Is there, besides, because when I was looking online for when I saw the stats in regards to the millennials, is it specifically them, or there's different age group, like maybe people in their late 40s or 50s? Could they also be like vulnerable to a burnout?
Oh, absolutely. Pretty much every ages. We even have like elementary school kids that have their own version of burnout. So it's not limited to an age group. It's not limited to a gender. It's pretty much any place you've got constant and ongoing stress from constant and ongoing friction points, you've got the opportunity for burnout.
Wow. So is it possible for someone to be experiencing a burnout and not knowing about it? They just keep going, keep going?
Actually, it is. And strangely, you find it particularly in men, because Americans in particular, I'm not quite so familiar with Canadian culture, but particularly Americans, we have this cultural messaging that's kind of a mixed message. On the one hand, we say, don't suffer in silence, ask for help. But then we give you movies like Die Hard, and we give you Batman and all of these heroes who stoically solve their problems on their own. And so men kind of get this cultural message that they're meant to just kind of tough it out. And when you start talking to people on the internet, you get a lot of people that go, nah, burnout's a myth. You just need to work harder. You're just kind of lazy, which is absolutely not true. Kind of some interesting statistics out there. There's an actual word in Japanese that means death from overwork. The word is karoshi. Their work culture is so be stoic, get the job done, oriented, that they have people dying enough that they've created a word for it. And the crazy thing is, a recent study by the International Labor Organization showed that Americans work 137 hours more per year than Japanese workers do.
137?
Yeah. 260 more than the UK and 499 more than France.
Wow.
So if you've got Japanese workers dying from overwork and Americans are working more, it's not a laziness issue.
So if someone is experiencing that, what would be what are the several steps that they would have to take for them to have a full recovery?
Well, the first step is figuring out what's going on. You can see this, and they say it in many different ways in every recovery program out there, but you cannot recover from anything until you know what you're recovering from. And that's really important to understand, is that you have to get those details in place. So the very first thing when you're talking about burnout is figuring out where those friction points are. And there are 6 general areas of every work life. Workload, control, reward, community, fairness, and values. And most people have friction spots in more than one of those areas. So say if you have a workload friction, it may be that your boss has unrealistic deadlines, and so you can't meet them. You may have control issues because your boss is a micromanaging person that just can't let you have any kind of autonomy. Reward, it may be that you're underpaid, or it may just be that you're underwhelmed. Community, you might feel isolated, and that happened quite a bit during COVID. We saw a lot of that community mismatch, the friction there. Fairness, maybe your boss plays favorites. And then values, it may be a situation where you work for a company that's destroying the environment, or that they just don't believe what you believe. And any of those areas, if you've got friction and it's ongoing stress causing friction, those are where your burnout's going to happen. So there are several tools out there on the internet that will help you pinpoint exactly where your friction spots are. And once you know what your friction spots are, well, then you've got a plan, because you can go, okay, if my friction spot is that I'm underpaid, do I negotiate with my employer to get a higher paycheck, or do I find another job and negotiate with that employer to get a higher paycheck? But at least you know that that's a problem spot for you. And again, once you know what you need to recover from, you've got a plan to recover.
Mm-hmm. So how long would you say it takes for someone to recover from a burnout?
Well, burnout is really unique, because what bothers you may not bother me. What causes stress to the person on my left may not cause stress for the person on my right. So a burnout is as unique as you are. It's as unique as your stress points are. And that's why 2 people can stand in the same room and do the same job, and one of them burns out and the other one doesn't, because it's personal. So then, depending on where your friction points are, I mean, if I have a boss that's micromanaging, how am I going to handle that? Is that something that I can handle by changing departments? Is that something that I can change my job and maybe get another boss that's a micromanager, maybe not? Or can I find a way to manage up, to maybe micromanage back? by providing information to my boss ahead of time. If I know they're going to come out and ask me 6 things, what did you do today? How did you do it? You know, how fast did you get it done? If I get up, I send an email going, this is what I'm doing today. This is how fast I'm going to do it. And this is how I'm going to get it done. Then they're not in my lap. So part of it depends on where your friction points are, how quickly you can resolve them, and whether they can't be resolved and you've got to start over.
So you work, do you work with patients? You work with patients who've suffered burnout. How do you work with them? How do you do it?
Well, I have my diagnostic tool that I use that we're working on making available to anyone that wants it for free. It should be available to everybody in about a month, but it's not quite out and available yet. But I have my diagnostic tool that I use where we get down to the nuts and bolts of exactly what areas specifically are the problem for you. And then once we know that, it's one goal at a time, because if you try to fix all the problems, it's just overwhelming and horrible. So it's pick one goal. What's the one thing that's making you the most crazy? Maybe nobody recognizes your accomplishments. How do you go about correcting that? You know, what are some strategies? And we set SMART goals, specific, measurable, measurable goals that get you past that particular hurdle. In the instance of maybe you're just not recognized, maybe you start by recognizing the people around you so they go, hey, this is kind of cool. Well, thank you for doing your job too. But you make those goals and you work them one at a time until things are more in alignment. Now, if it's a huge mismatch with you, it's unlikely that you're going to go from a huge mismatch to no mismatch overnight. But I can get it from a huge mismatch to a moderate mismatch usually pretty easily. And then from there, you go from your moderate to your small or gone.
Okay. Do you think everybody needs to see someone, like if they're experiencing a burnout, or it's like, do they have to see a doctor, or they could do it, they can manage on their own?
You don't have to do it. When I went through my burnout, I didn't have anybody. So I did all the heavy lifting myself. But I will say this, even Batman had an Alfred. Help is better than not help.
So you've talked about that you went through a burnout. What did you learn in the whole process of that situation?
Well, the first thing I learned is that it's okay to not be okay. If you're not feeling right, if you're struggling, don't beat up on yourself for struggling. That just makes it worse. Accept that you're not in the right place. Once you can get past that, yeah, okay, something's broken, and recognize that something is broken, not I'm broken, because that's a completely different thing. Something is broken. Let's fix it. And then from there, it's a matter of figuring out how to fix it. And like I said, for me, I didn't ask for help because I'm a silly girl that doesn't really like to ask for help. I was like, nah, I can figure this out. I'm a pharmacist. I can do anything. So I did not ask for help. So I took the long way around. But the information is out there. If you go looking, it is out there for you. Whether you go to somebody who's done the heavy lifting or you try and do it yourself, the information is there. Find out where the problems are, set the goals. And that's what I did. Now, it took me almost 4 years to get fully to a point where I felt good. I was sleeping consistently. I knew that what was going on in my life was going to work for me. And I didn't have that constant sense of overwhelm that comes with being burned out.
What do you say, like, because sometimes I hear people do burnouts, but not once, but multiple times. What do you have to say about that?
It can be cyclic. If
Oh, yeah.
you,
Oh.
yeah, if you have a job and you get burned out, and instead of doing the work and figuring out what the problem is and fixing it, or even figuring out what the problem is and changing jobs to one that doesn't have that problem for you, if you're repeating those same friction situations without understanding how to resolve them, then you're going to get another burnout because it's still more friction. So you quit your job and get a new job and burn out, and quit your job and get a new job and burn out. And it can be cyclic. At some point, you need to learn to recognize where your friction points are and have a plan of action for how to deal with them. And that's essentially how you maintain once you've recovered so you don't fall back.
And I want to touch just a little bit about mental health. It's very, we talk about it a lot now. What do you have to, what do you have to say to that, like in general concerning that?
That's really vague. Mental health is really no different than physical health. It's part of who you are. And I know that at some point, and in some cultures, there was some stigma around seeking help, finding an assistant. But again, even Batman had Alfred. You got to have somebody to be your support system, whether you're paying them as a therapist, whether it's a family member, whatever. It's so hard to go it alone. There has to be a support system for you. Studies have actually shown that loneliness, trying to go it alone, is harder on your body than heart disease. Like physically harder on your body than heart disease. So again, whether you find a therapist, whether it's a family member, whether it's a dog or a cat, you need someone.
So with everything we've talked about, what would be your last words or advice concerning burnout?
My advice is this: if you are not currently experiencing burnout, start building up your resilience. Start finding things that help you release stress, things that help you release that friction, let it go. Maybe it's exercise, maybe it's nutrition, maybe it's yoga, whatever it is that helps you release that stress. Find it now. Build your reserves now, because there's never ever been a stress-free work environment, and there never ever will be a stress-free work environment. So that will happen. Now, whether you get burned out for it or whether you manage it really depends on your personal reserves and how you handle the things that come at you. And, you don't always have the ability to change your work situation. I can't control what my employer decides to do. I can control how I choose to respond to it. And if I know ahead of time that this particular employer destroys the environment and that's going to cause a problem for me, I maybe don't take the job. But until you learn to think about those areas, a lot of people, you just kind of go along making money, paying your bills. And all of a sudden you look down and you're stuck in this quicksand going, oh, oops, now what do I do?
Okay. Thank you, Hollie, for being here. It was as soon as I saw your profile, because when I'm looking for guests and I saw what you were doing, I said I want to bring her on our show because it affects all of us. Like, we work, we're doing 100 things, sometimes, and it can happen to all of us. So I'm very glad that you accepted my invitation. I hope everybody who's listening and watching found some value, and they can apply those everything that they've heard through this podcast. So thank you, Hollie, for being here. And where can people find you on the internet or on social media?
They can find me on my website at www.burnoutdrhollie.com. And after we booked, I started thinking about it. It was really important to me that your listeners have a tool that they can actually hold in their hands and physically use. So I did put together a quiz. Which of your personality traits is making you vulnerable to burnout? They can find that at burnoutdrhollie.com/quiz. Takes about a minute to complete. At the end of it, it calculates all that input and spits out about a 10-page report that details the upsides of your particular attribute, some potential pitfalls, how you might want to manage them, and those first couple steps to take for recovering from burnout if you happen to be in a place where you need to get started right away.
Okay, nice, great. Thank you. So you heard it. So thank you, Hollie, for being here. And like I said, it was a pleasure to meet you and to talk to you. And for everybody's listening and watching, thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. Welcome to A Better Lifestyle. My guest was Dr. Hollie Sturgeon. And my name is Richard, and we'll see you on the next episode, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Richard.
No problem. My pleasure.